So we're on the last part of our series, The Rescuers. We've had the magnificent seven, these 7 women involved in the rescuing of Moses. We had the spy keeper, Rahab, the diplomat, Abigail, the concealer, Jehosheba. We had Esther. We've had the Samaritan woman. And today's rescuer is a little bit different to the other ones we've had in the series. This kind of woman who's there, but you kind of blink and you miss her involvement. And you might miss it as well because it's maybe one of the more humorous passages in the Bible. So I'm going to ask Debbie to come forward and read for us.
Reading from Acts 12:1-17. It was about this time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. When he saw that this met with the approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. "Quick, get up," he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and sandals." And Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me," the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord has sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen." When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." "You're out of your mind," they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, "It must be his angel." But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. "Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this," he said, and then he left for another place. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Debbie. Now, if you have a kind of a TV program or a film or a book, rarely do you get 2 characters in it with the same name. Carefully written to avoid the confusion. But in reality, it's different. The church here, we've got a David and a Liz and a Liz, and a Janet, and a Mike Brown and a Mike Brown. And in the Bible, there are a lot of Marys. Mary, the mother of Jesus, but that's not who we're talking about today. Nor Mary Magdalene, nor Martha's Mary and Martha, that one. Nor are we talking about mother of James and John, probably also wife of Clopas, or the person who's described as the other Mary. Now today with Mary, the mother of John Mark. Who was John Mark? You find him kind of a few chapters later, possibly the person who wrote Mark's Gospel, but possibly not. But this guy, you kind of get the story of Paul and Barnabas having a big argument together, and the reason is that John Mark had been on a missionary journey with them. He decided to leave them part way through. Then Barnabas was saying, let's take John Mark with us. Paul was saying no, and they have this big fallout over it. I would say firstly, these kind of little things kind of make the Bible, I think, a bit more authentic. Firstly, they haven't tried to write all the names to make them really nice and easy for everybody to know which person's which. But actually also, it doesn't try to hide over the fact that things weren't always perfect. If you want to say, hey, look at these people who follow God, they're all perfect. It's not written like that. It's written as actually sometimes they're not. So the context of what's happening here is the church is being persecuted, Christians are being persecuted, Christians are being executed, and the fact that by this point the story, Saul has had his conversion experience, hasn't changed what's happening. And James, the brother of John, with a different mother, Mary, has been executed, and Herod sees, whoa, the crowd's enjoying execution around here. Who else can we have? And they arrest Peter. And Peter is awaiting certain execution. And the church is praying earnestly. And we find out a passing comment, almost lost in the story, in the humour of Peter arriving, kind of back and knocking on the door. It's running back and nobody believes it. In between all that, we just missed the small comment that the church was meeting in the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark. Three things we might be able to say about this. One is probably, not definitely, but probably a widow. Probably fairly wealthy because, property. She's also got this kind of gate, and she's got a servant who goes to open, Rhoda, who goes to answer the door when Peter knocks. And thirdly, the church meets in her home. And we know that because Peter knew exactly where to go when he got out of prison. And in this story, Mary is courageous. Herod is a complete psycho. He's quite happy to kill anybody if it pleases a crowd. And if he knows that the church is meeting in her home, he can have her executed. He can have her home removed, destroyed, wiped out, and maybe killed and her home destroyed. We don't know how secretive the Christians meeting up were, but many came, and so the risk of being caught was high. Materially, and in terms of life and family, she was courageous. And today, as we thought about the prayers, there is a persecuted church where people have to be like Mary and take the risk of losing everything. Jobs, livelihood, reputation, family, freedom, and life. A few weeks ago we looked at the subject of gentleness, and we saw that gentleness isn't a kind of a weak thing, but it is strength under control, and we had different images that somehow represented that, and one of those was a rocket ship showing strength and power under control. And Mary is not only generous, she's not only courageous, she is generous. She uses her resources for the Lord. She uses the things she has for God. And so she uses her home as a place the prayer can happen. She uses her house as a place the church can meet. And it becomes a launch site for prayer and a launch site for God's power. And God answers this prayer But Mary is the one who resourced the church to have that launch pad for the prayer to happen. And because of her risk and courageousness and generosity, her strengths that were her resources, she used them for God's control. And because of that, Peter is rescued. And in a heartbeat, though, her name just slips through the story. And we almost missed Mary, the resourcer, the provider, the enabler. I wasn't really sure what to call this service. Mary, the rescuer. And this story just raises two kind of things in us about an expectation and reality gap for us. It is a challenge to how we use our resources for God's kingdom, personally and as a church. How much is our lives do we give and our resources to be a launch site for prayer? Our resources might be the space we have, they might be the money we have, it might be the energy we have, it might be the time we have, it might be something else. But Mary is willing to risk it all for the Lord. And we've seen that throughout this series of the rescuers, from the one right at the beginning with Moses, women who are willing to risk it all to rescue. And in that expectation gap of what we're willing to give, we were singing, weren't we, the song that Dwayne and Keisha chose, all to Jesus, I surrender all. You might remember a year ago I ran a video with kind of a parody of worship, and it's, I surrender some to Jesus, I surrender some. Romans 12 says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. The idea of giving all to him. And in Peter it says this, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve, whatever we have to give, to offer, to enable God's kingdom to grow. And the second gap this story tells us is in our expectation about what prayer does. If there's that gap about, kind of what I see, what I do when I pray, Lord, can you do this? And what I actually think is not so sure. Lord, heal. Lord, protect. Lord, can you? Is there an expectation gap between what we pray and what we expect to happen? And when we read these stories, they're amazing, aren't they, in the Bible? Peter just walking out of a prison. It's incredible, isn't it? Oh, Lord, protect them. It's not going to happen though, is it? Is there an expectation gap? Do we have it? I'm reminded of the story of Brother Yun. I don't know if you've ever heard of Brother Yun. And so he was a Christian in the house churches in China, and he was arrested, and he was held in a high security prison, and was beaten, and then one day the Lord said, get up and walk out. And he walked out past one set of security doors, past some guards who were just staring straight through him, out the building, and out of these open gates and into freedom. These crazy stories that we read in the Bible also happen at other times. I remember when we were in Mersey and there was a couple, and she discovered she was pregnant, and they were in India, and they had found that this pregnancy was ectopic, and so the guide said, well, shall we just abort the baby now? There's no chance of it surviving. And they said, no, we'd like to have people praying for us for a few days. We'll come back next week. And people prayed. And the next week they went back and he said, okay, let me do the scan. And he went to where he was expected to scan. He went, sure. And then apparently the sonographer just went, whoa! As he'd found that this baby had somehow moved from being in completely the wrong place to being in the womb. And this child is very well many years on. When I got a text through saying about it, it was almost like I almost want to knock on my phone and make sure I was reading it right. There's an expectation gap sometimes between what we're praying and what we're expecting. Mary was a risk taker, a resource for the church, an enabler for the church, someone who was set up a launch pad for the prayer of God. And she impacted in a rescue. It impacted Peter, impacted his faith, it therefore impacted those that Peter met and all his ministry beyond there. It impacted soldiers, it impacted the church, and the word of God, we read at the end of that passage, spreads. What is the reality gap, expectation gap for you in terms of resources and prayer? And so we're going to sing our final song